In the first 2 decades of the 20th century, the owner of Stranmillis House and its 47-acre estate was James McConnell, who was a Justice of the Peace and a director of W.D. Henderson and Sons, cement and tile merchants who had premises at Waring Street and Clarendon Dock. When he moved to Derryvolgie House on the Malone Road, Stranmillis House was put on the market in 1920, and it was bought by Queen's University. I presume that Queen's initially were planning to use it for their own expansion, maybe in building new blocks for education. But with the partition of Ireland, there was limited access to teacher training facilities. And the newly established Department of Education put forward plans for an institution at which men and women would receive training to become teachers in public elementary schools. In 1922, the Government of Northern Ireland, the Ministry of Finance, purchased Stranmillis House as the site for a teacher training facility. The purchase price was £1,400, which equates to approximately £84,647 in current terms, which I think you'll agree for a 47-acre site is a bit of a bargain. The first intake of trainee teachers took place in October 1922. So this year sees the centenary of the formation of this college, which is now Stranmillis University College, part of Queen's University Belfast. The training college started with 136 first-year students and 66 second-year students, and there was no religious restriction on eligibility. So a lot of Roman Catholic trainee teachers would have come to Stranmillis, although they would then have completed their education at St. Mary's College over in England, in London. And that would be more to do with the Roman Catholic element, the Roman Catholic theology element of their teacher training. Of the 202 initial students, 153 and 49 were men. So 153 were females and 49 were males. That's a ratio of 75% towards the females. In 1946, the ratio of females to males had dropped to 68%, with 157 of the 231 students being females. In January 1923, the Ministry of Finance published invitations to tender for the erection of temporary bungalows and for the adaptation of Stranmillis House to provide accommodation for students. In 1924, Roland Ingleby Smith, the chief architect at the Department of Finance, submitted plans for the erection of a new building which would provide self-contained facilities for the training of teachers. So you can see in this map that Stranmillis House is almost smack in the middle of the estate. Over to this side, you can see some buildings which were would have been used by the staff at Stranmillis House. And when it became a teacher training college, it was used as accommodation for the ancillary staff, mainly men who were working in the grounds, so the groundsmen, boilermen, that sort of thing. And bear that in mind, because at the very end of the talk, I'll be mentioning one of the boilermen that worked at Stranmillis College. In March 1924, newspapers reported that the hostels for female students were now occupied, and in addition to the students' accommodation, in addition to the students, the accommodation also provided for a warden, a matron, and a cook. So there had to be a supervising mature woman on the premises, and that would have been the warden. Stranmillis House had been extended and adapted to provide room for 60 students, and the newly built hostel provided rooms for 100 students. The use of the term bungalow to describe the accommodation conjures up images of detached or semi-detached units, but as you can see from the photograph, it was a continuous block, and these were actually several wings with a central corridor where you had the common rooms and so forth. Ironically, it forms a bit of an H shape when you look at it from above. There were also kitchens, and there were individual rooms in 5 wings. But this was temporary accommodation. It was They were wooden, and they weren't designed to last, and they no longer exist on the site. In 1928, Balmoral Hall on Balmoral Avenue was opened as accommodation for the men's students. And this building had previously been used as a female industrial school before becoming the Hampton House Girls' Home. So you can see it's quite a grand Georgian looking building. It was also quite far away from the college. If you think that the main entrance to Stranmillis College to Balmoral Avenue, you're talking about probably a couple of miles. I don't know whether this was to keep the male students away from the female students, or what the rationale was for buying Balmoral Hall. H&J Martin commenced the construction of the main building in 1926, and Stranmillis Training College was officially opened on 1st May 1930, or rather this main lecture block. Up until this time, a lot of the lectures and tutorials would have been held in rooms at Queen's University Belfast, which was just half a mile down the road. The building featured concealed lighting so as to minimize the distraction of attention from the blackboard or lantern screen. So right the way back in 1930s, they were using projected images as part of the teacher training. Nowadays, we've come back and a lot of schools are using PowerPoint and so forth. But way back in 1930, Stranmillis Training College had adopted that means of education and getting across information. All the doors were provided with silent closing mechanisms. So if you've ever been in some of the older schools like Methody or Campbell College or whatever, the doors, whenever they were opened and let shut, you know, they clattered. But these were all to be silent closing so as to cause as little disruption as possible to teaching. There's a complete absence of pipes, with gas, water, and electricity being conveyed by concealed ducts. It was the first building in Northern Ireland for which a panel heating system was adopted, with heating pipes being arranged in panels and then embedded in ceilings and walls. So it was a very clean looking building, and I posted some images of what the rooms looked like, the various lecture theatres and so forth a few days ago. And it's just very plain. There's no extraneous extrusions, there's no pipes, there's no radiators and so forth. So it's very advanced, very up to date, and a very attractive teaching environment and learning environment. On 4th September 1939, the War Office requisitioned the college and the grounds, and the Teacher Training College relocated to Portrush. The main building was converted for use as a military hospital, with the student hostels being used to house the medical and ancillary staff. The principal's house became the RAMC officers' mess, and later in the war, the Admiralty used part of the premises as a naval sick bay. The War Office de-requisitioned the college with effect from 1st April 1944, although the Admiralty continued to use part of the premises into 1945. Teacher training returned to Stranmillis in September 1944, although it would be another 4 years before everything was back to normal, as renovations were necessary. During the military occupation, the college received a compensation rent of £3,000 per annum, and that equates to £208,647 in current terms. The rent for Stranmillis House was £550 per quarter, and that's £32,760 in current terms. And the rent for Balmoral Hall was £585 per quarter, £34,845 in current terms. So although the college had to vacate the premises, they were still receiving an income in terms of a compensation rent. The earliest references in the newspapers relate to appeals for the likes of games, books, and magazines. Obviously, a lot of the men would maybe be bedbound, and they would get bored very easily. This photograph was published in the Belfast Telegraph on 13th October 1939, so approximately 6 weeks after the requisition had been taken place, and already you had beds in place and soldiers who were receiving treatment being on the premises. In the photograph are Miss Bamber, who is the matron, Lieutenant KB Armstrong, and Major D. McVicker, who is officer commanding the hospital. This doesn't look great on the screen, but it's a letter that was published in the Belfast newsletter from a patient. This was also in October 1939. I would be grateful if we could have such as cards and darts, etc., for the boys in Stranmillis Military Hospital to play with, to pass away the time, as there is nothing for them to do. It is rather a long day when you have no games, and as this hospital has just been opened, they find it very difficult to get everything they require. It's not very nice walking and lying in bed all day with nothing to do.